Alright, getting back a little more into my element here. Today we're gonna switch things up and we're gonna talk about cruisers. And the reason I want to talk about cruisers is inevitably in the sometime future, we don't know if it's gonna be next month or next quarter, but we all know the United States cruiser line is getting a split. And instead of just a split, it's getting a little bit of a rework as well. Cleveland's going to get jumbled around. It's going to get moved up a couple tiers. So a lot of excitement there for players that absolutely love the USN Cruiser line. For me, the USN Cruiser line is a little sentimental. I mean, for anyone who's been playing World of Warships for a long time, it's sentimental. And the reason for that is it's probably one of the first lines that you ever played. It was either that or the IJN Cruiser line. So you either got your start in an Erie or a Hashidate. And we all know that the Erie's kind of the butt of every joke, and for those of you who've been around long enough that remember when you could absolutely fail Division and wound up with an Erie in a Tier 8 battle or something like that. Yeah, fun ships, but you know, you grind past the Erie fairly quick. You're in it for what, 3 or 4 rounds, and then you move on to the Chester. So with that, let's take a little bit of a walk down memory lane. I'm just going to go over the ships and what I thought of the USN Cruiser line as a whole, which again, I have a strong affinity for. I have a deep-seated love for the United States Cruiser line. Not only because it was one of the first, but you know, it's the home team, and you got to root for the home team always, right? So let's get down to it. We already touched on the Erie. Tier 1 ships are always a kind of a throwaway ship. Right after that, you got the Chester, which I'm sure none of us have really fond memories of the Chester either. That was just one more speed bump on the way to get to a ship that you actually enjoy playing with. And that brings us to the St. Louis. And for those of you out there that have grinded through the entire American line, I'm sure that you have a little bit of love for the St. Louis. I mean, how can you not? And we're not talking about the Brooklyn class St. Louis, at least I think it was a Brooklyn class. We're talking about the Dreadnought era St. Louis down at Tier 3 that was an absolute flamethrower. I mean, this was a seal clubbing ship back in the day. Players would go up and then they'd drop back down and they'd play the St. Louis, much in the way that people like to play the Nikolai or a bunch of other low-tier seal clubbing ships. The St. Louis was actually one of the first of them just because its ability to set fires was immense. And I mean, the St. Louis in many ways was kind of like a mini Atlanta, or in Atlanta. I don't think the St. Louis is really much smaller than the Atlanta, but God, it was a fun ship. Very, very enjoyable. So, you know, that was the first part of the grind, the United States Cruiser line, which was truly enjoyable. And of course, after the St. Louis, you had the Phoenix. You got some torpedoes in your cruisers, and that's kind of unique to the United States Cruiser line. You don't have those for too long. But the Phoenix and the Omaha, I mean, while they weren't spectacular ships, they weren't horrible ships. I think really both of them were just there. They were necessary. They were not a speed bump, and they taught some critical skills that you needed to progress up the line. You know, the Phoenix and the Omaha is really where you learned how to play United States cruisers. They're the ones that taught you that if you go broadside, you're going to get punished by battleships, especially Tier 5. So there's a lot of learning that was accomplished with the Omaha, and to a lesser extent the Phoenix down at Tier 4. But once you got to the Omaha, you felt like you were somewhere. You felt like you had accomplished something. You felt like you had a ship that you could do decently well in. But I wasn't a fan of the Omaha or the Phoenix, really. To me, they didn't feel like modern cruisers. They weren't. They were kind of antiquated. So that brings us to the next ship. And I think we are all familiar with the Cleveland. The Cleveland, back in closed beta, if you weren't able to play it in the early days, the Cleveland was the original overpowered ship. The word OP and Cleveland were synonymous with each other. They went hand in hand. And the Cleveland still has a very, very hard citadel to find. I think most players will admit that when you're going up against a Cleveland and in a battleship, it is very, very hard to find a Cleveland citadel. And that's because it's got that split boiler citadel. And the gun citadels are very, very hard to get to. But the Cleveland, a lot of love for this ship, an absolute large amount of love. The anti-aircraft capabilities of this ship were phenomenal. The HE capabilities of this ship were phenomenal. Unfortunately, at some point, it got a little bit of a nerf during CBT and never really was quite as potent as it used to be. But that might change since it's being moved to Tier 8 now. So the Cleveland's going to get a little bit of a love. But yeah, the Cleveland was the first ship that players came to that they said, yes, I love the United States Cruiser line. I absolutely love this ship. Love the anti-aircraft on it, love the guns on it, the HE on it, can wreck destroyers. But unfortunately, the Cleveland just lost a little bit of its relevance as anti-aircraft just grew out of favor. I mean, where are we now? You see aircraft carriers maybe 1 every 10 rounds. Granted, it's a little more down in the lower tiers, but the AA on the American line as a whole just doesn't have the potency that it used to. And in a way, it's kind of antiquated, the entire line. The line used to have importance. It used to be vital to be in a USN Cruiser and stay close to your carrier. I mean, I remember back in the day it was, I'm going to go guard our aircraft carrier. I'm in a Cleveland or Pensacola. I'm going to go protect. I'm going to go protect these battleships. And that doesn't happen so much anymore. And this, of course, was back in the days when AA was also visually stunning and it just erupted like fireworks. And I still don't think we're back where we used to be. I just don't. But the Cleveland, I think scope creep just really made it a lesser ship than it used to be. But still, lots of love for the Cleveland. Now, for those that have grinded the entire line, you also know that once you've completed the Cleveland, you go to the Pensacola, and the two are somewhat complete opposites. While players have a strong love for the Cleveland, the Pensacola, or the Pepsi-Cola, which is basically a tin can, players didn't really care for. It's squishy, it's easy to citadel. I mean, the AP is still strong on it. It's still got that nice USN AP, but the Pensacola is just not a fun ship in my opinion in general. It really isn't. Now, they have buffed it a little bit. Same as the New Orleans. The New Orleans, I guess, is not as bad as the Pensacola, but I wouldn't say I was enthusiastic to play the New Orleans. It was really just kind of an upgraded Pensacola. But both of them were just necessary in the grind. And I think these two ships represent the hardest part of the former USN Cruiser grind. I really just hated those two tiers because you're grinding for so long in ships that if you make one mistake, you're going to get deleted. So while I don't think either was a horrible ship, and you could do some absolute damage with their AP was, or still is, somewhat really good. It's just not a fun grind. And you get in the doldrums, and you're just like, come on, can I please move on to the Baltimore? Can I get done with the Pensacola? Can I get done with the New Orleans? And, you know, I grinded both ships during CBT, and I started the line over again when we moved to gold, when the game went gold. And I stopped at Cleveland for a long time just because I didn't want to go through the Pensacola again, and just because I didn't want to grind the New Orleans again. But I did. I started back up, and especially after the buff, I tried them out, and I think I got halfway on them in free XP the rest of the way. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. And that's not a knock against the two ships. You know, the buffs made them a lot better. You know, New Orleans with radar, it's got really good functionality to it. The ship, in the hands of a good player, can do really, really good things. But having grinded it once and finding it not too different than what I remembered it to be, I just couldn't do it. So, I think I got halfway on the New Orleans and free XP to the Baltimore. And the Baltimore. Yeah. Alright, the Baltimore, it seems like Warships has this fun thing where they like making the Tier 9 grind absolutely miserable on some ships, and reward you with the Tier 10 ship. That's not the case for every line. The Fletcher is an absolutely phenomenal destroyer. Iowa, another great battleship. Those were two very enjoyable grinds to get to Tier 10. In many ways, the Tier 10s for those lines were somewhat of a letdown after coming from Fletcher and Iowa, the Montana just being a slightly upgraded Iowa, and the gearing, you know, being the same for the Fletcher. And many might argue that the Fletcher is a better destroyer overall. But the Baltimore is one of the roughest grinds to get to Tier 10. It really is. Much the way grinding to get to the Zao is in Tier 9. The Ibuki is just the same as the Baltimore, in my opinion. It's just a flat-out, long, arduous grind, and it doesn't help that the Baltimore has such a slow reload, and you're in Tier 10 battles, and you're just getting shellacked by battleships. I mean, at its base, the Baltimore has good functionality. It's important. It's got good radar. And my advice, if you're trying to finish out this line before the split happens, do not free XP through the Baltimore. Absolutely do not. And the reason I say that is you learn so many valuable things playing the Baltimore. Things that when you get to the Des Moines, it's just going to make you a better cruiser player. And it's going to help you when you get to the Des Moines, because the Baltimore is a Des Moines in a sense. They're very similar ships, with the exception of Des Moines' absolutely stellar, phenomenal reload. I mean, the AP on the Baltimore is great. You can absolutely peg ships with it, but the problem is your damage per minute's pretty low in it. So I would say out of the entire grind, the Baltimore was probably the most laborious, and I just didn't enjoy it. But it was worth it. Because at the end of the Baltimore grind, at the end of the rainbow is the pot of gold, and that pot of gold is Des Moines. And in my opinion, which, you know, might not be worth too much, the Des Moines is probably one of the best ships in the game. I have so much love for the Des Moines. So much love. It is such a fun ship. It is such a devastatingly powerful ship. I love the Des Moines. I love its 4.6, I think, second reload. I love its ability to set ships on fire. I love its ability to battle tank to a moderately successful degree. I love its ability to use AP on broadside battleships and just eat them apart. I love its ability to go out and absolutely destroy Minotaurs within 30 seconds if they're broadside, even less. I just absolutely love the Des Moines through and through. And even if you don't spec it as an anti-aircraft ship, it's a great ship to have. So the entire grind is worth it to get to the Des Moines. Absolutely. And if you're still thinking about doing it or haven't done it yet, yes, you know, do it. It's worth it. It's a lot of fun. The Des Moines is a great ship. And it's really, really a perfect ending for the grind on this line. A line with some ups and some downs. But overall, I still think the US Cruiser line, if used correctly and if used by strong hands, is a very, very strong line. Maybe a little less reliable than it was back in the day due to a little bit of power creep by other ships and other lines, but who can't love the granddaddy of all cruiser lines? So there's your look back at the USN Cruiser line. I'm looking forward to the split, and we'll revisit these ships once the split happens, because I'm sure some of them are going to change in their abilities and what they do. Yeah, guys, thanks for watching. I am out.